Section 1. The Silent Hunters Rise. December 14th, 1941, 40 miles west of Luzon, Philippines, 3:52 hours. Black water swallows the horizon as the USS S-38 glides just beneath the surface, a steel shadow in a vast, hostile sea. Inside the cramped control room, red battle lanterns flicker against sweating metal. Condensation drips like rain. The air smells of diesel, men, and fear. Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Coe, eyes sharp despite exhaustion, leans over the periscope well. "Bring her up. Periscope depth," he orders quietly. The diving officer repeats the command, his voice steady but tight. Valves hiss. Pumps groan. Slowly, the old S-class submarine rises through the dark water like a ghost returning from the dead. When the periscope breaches the surface, Coe lifts it gently. A long moment of silence. Then he whispers, "Convoy." Through the narrow glass cylinder, the world appears in a curved, dreamlike frame. Silhouettes of Japanese freighters scattered across the dawn, their hulls black against the rising sun. A destroyer leads the formation, gray bow slicing the waves. Coe lowers the periscope, heart pounding. "Weapons, stand by!" The crew springs into motion. Torpedomen loading Mark 10 torpedoes, men at the helm gripping wheels slick with sweat, the navigator tracing firing angles on a grease pencil board. "Con, sonar, screws increasing, multiple ships." The Japanese convoy is accelerating. Coe looks around the tiny room. Some men are barely 20 years old. None of them have seen real combat before this week. He adjusts his cap. "This is our chance, boys." Quiet as the grave. The S-38 steadies into position. The torpedo doors open with a metallic groan that reverberates through every rib of the submarine. Coe calls out, "Fire 1!" The submarine shudders. "Fire 2!" Another jolt. Two deadly silver fish streak silently into the black ocean. Inside the S-38, the crew holds their breath.
40 seconds. 30. 20.
The sonar man's eyes widen. "Impact!" A thunderous, muffled explosion ripples through the water. The control room erupts into cheers, but only for a second, because the destroyer has just turned. Fast, aggressive, hunting. Coe's expression hardens. "All ahead full. Dive! Dive! Dive!" Klaxons scream. The boat tilts violently downward. Bulkheads groan as depth increases. Light bulbs sway overhead. Then, whoom! The first depth charge detonates. The submarine bucks wildly like a kicked animal. Pipes rattle. Dust falls from the ceiling. A wrench clatters against the deck. Another explosion. Closer. The men cling to rails, teeth clenched. The destroyer is dropping charges in tight patterns, a killing dance perfected by the Japanese Navy. Coe checks the depth gauge. "Take her deeper." "Sir, this class isn't rated." "I said deeper, damn it!" Another round of explosions. The lights flicker. But the sub holds, miraculously. After a long stretch of silence broken only by the hum of electric motors, Coe exhales. They've lost us. For now. The men slump against bulkheads, trembling from adrenaline. They survived. Their torpedo did its work. And as the S-38 slips back into the abyss, Coe mutters, "They don't know it yet. But this is just the beginning." Because while the world still believes battleships and aircraft carriers will decide the Pacific War, a different truth is awakening here in the deep. The U.S. submarine force has entered the fight, and its silent hunters will soon become Japan's worst nightmare. Section 2. Japan's lifelines begin to break. January 17, 1942. Tokyo Bay, Japan, 4:10 hours. Frost laces the edges of the windows inside the Maritime Ministry as Vice Admiral Tajiro Toyota stands over a sprawling wall map of East Asia. Red pins mark shipping routes, thousands of miles of fragile lifelines stretching toward the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, and the Philippines. Toyota taps his gloved finger on a cluster of red lines. "These," he says quietly, "are the arteries that feed the empire." A junior officer clears his throat. "Sir, another tanker was lost off Luzon tonight." Toyota freezes. "How many this week?" "7, sir." The admiral exhales slowly, staring at the map as if the paper itself had betrayed him. Japan's war machine runs on oil, foreign oil, and every ton must travel across oceans patrolled by enemies. But until now, those enemies were expected to be British destroyers or American carriers, not invisible hunters beneath the waves. Toyota turns to face the room. "You are certain it was a submarine?" "Yes, Admiral. Survivors reported torpedoes. No aircraft seen." A cold weight settles in the Admiral's stomach. If even the old, obsolete American submarines are sinking ships, what happens when their newer ones arrive? Meanwhile, 6,200 miles away, USS Gudgeon, 90 miles west of Truk Lagoon, 21:14 hours. Rain lashes the conning tower as Lieutenant Commander William Logan peers through binoculars. Lightning flashes, revealing a dark shape moving slowly across the horizon. A Japanese submarine tender. Logan whispers, "They think they're safe in this storm." Below deck, the control room is tense, red-lit, silent except for sonar pings echoing through steel. "Range closing," a sailor calls out. The Gudgeon stalks forward, patient, deliberate, predatory. "Open outer doors." Seawater surges past the torpedo tubes. The sound is low, hungry. "Set depth, 6 feet beneath the keel." The helmsman nods.
We beads on his brow.
"Fire!"
The boat trembles, a mechanical heartbeat in the storm. 15 seconds pass. 20. 25. Then, a blinding flash tears through the night. A column of water rises like a black fountain. Men aboard the Gudgeon erupt in cautious cheers as the target burns, flames licking upward through sheets of rain. Logan watches the inferno, water dripping from his cap. "That's for Pearl Harbor," someone whispers. But Logan doesn't smile, because he knows something the crew does not. This war will not be won by revenge. It will be won by starvation. Fortress of Hirohito, the Imperial Palace, Tokyo, January 20th, 1942, 10:40 hours. A coded report arrives on the Emperor's desk. Enemy submarines active near Truk, fuel losses significant. Hirohito reads the message in silence. His advisors insist that Japanese naval power is untouchable, that the Yamato, the greatest battleship ever built, will dominate the Pacific. But Hirohito knows something they refuse to admit. Battleships cannot sail without fuel. Carriers cannot launch planes without fuel. Tanks cannot move without fuel. Japan's lifeline is the sea. If the American submarines cut those arteries, the empire will bleed out from within. Hirohito folds the message carefully. His voice is barely audible. "Find them, or we are finished." Back in the Pacific, USS Gudgeon descends into darkness, engines humming softly as it slips beneath the waves. Logan looks at his exhausted crew, men who have gone days without real sleep. He speaks quietly. "Tonight was one ship, one victory. But there are hundreds more out there." He pauses. "And we're going to take every one of them." The crew nods, determination hardening their faces. They don't know it yet, but this silent campaign will destroy half of Japan's merchant fleet. It will starve the factories, paralyze the army, and leave the Imperial Navy stranded in its own home waters. This is not a war of glory.
It is a war of strangulation, and America's submariners have just begun to tighten the noose. Section 3. The silent hunters turn deadlier. March 1942. Pearl Harbor Submarine Base, Hawaii. 0532 hours. Salted wind rolls across the docks as a new submarine, the sleek, freshly commissioned USS Wahoo, SS-238, gleams under the rising sun. Lieutenant Commander Marvin Kennedy runs his hand along the hull, feeling the cold steel vibrate with the hum of generators. Engineers swarm over the deck, loading food, ammunition, and brand new torpedoes. Better torpedoes. Kennedy watches a crate being lowered. On the side, stenciled in crisp black paint, Mark 18, electric. These are the weapons the submariners fought for, demanded, and sometimes begged Washington to fix. No more unreliable Mark 14s running too deep or bouncing off Japanese hulls like rubber balls. The Wahoo's executive officer, Lieutenant Foster White, walks up beside him. "So, she's finally ready, Skipper?" Kennedy nods. "She's ready to hunt." Meanwhile, the Sea of Japan. Aboard the cargo ship Teiyo Maru, 3:47 hours. A soft fog blankets the water as the freighter plows through gentle waves. Inside the cramped radio room, a young Japanese operator sips bitter green tea. His eyes droop with exhaustion. He hasn't slept in 30 hours. He flips through reports from merchant captains. 2 tankers sunk off Palau. Convoy 213 missing. Suspected submarine near Formosa Strait. He sighs. If only the Americans would fight honorably, he mutters. To him, submarine warfare is dishonorable, a weapon for cowards. He doesn't know. The Americans are listening. Back at Pearl Harbor, USS Wahoo, torpedo room, 7:10 hours. The cramped space is alive with activity. Sailors check trigger mechanisms, wipe down gyroscopes, and double-check firing pistons. Sweat drips down their faces despite the cool morning air. Gunner's mate Samuel Ortiz grins as he inspects the Mark 18. "Electric, silent, beautiful," he says. "Beautiful," someone laughs. "It's a torpedo, Sam." "No, this is the future." They won't hear this one coming. And he's right. They won't. Pacific Ocean, April 1942. USS Wahoo moves like a shadow beneath the waves. The crew is silent, focused, their world lit only by red emergency lamps. "Contact bearing 042, the sonar operator says. "Merchantman, slow moving." Kennedy climbs into the periscope well. Water drips from the periscope head as it breaks the surface. He rotates it slowly. There, a Japanese cargo ship lumbering along, carrying oil drums stacked like mountains, unescorted. "Range? 1,200 yards and closing." Kennedy inhales sharply. "This is it, boys. Make it count." "Fire 1!" The Wahoo trembles. A white streak vanishes into the dark water. "Fire 2!" The second torpedo follows. The crew holds their breath. 15 seconds. 20. 25. Boom! A violent explosion splits the night. Flames erupt from the freighter's side as fuel ignites, turning the ship into a floating torch. Sailors scramble on deck, trying to free lifeboats, shouting orders drowned by fire. Kennedy lowers the periscope. "That's one fewer ship supplying their war machine," he whispers. Tokyo, Naval Command, April 19th, 1942, 11:30 hours. A tense briefing unfolds. Officers argue over tactics, convoy routes, sonar development, convoy escorts.
One man slams his fist on the table. "We cannot continue losing ships at this rate." Admiral Osami Nagano speaks calmly. "It is not the ships we are losing that concerns me." He pauses. "It is the food we are losing, the fuel we are losing, the industry we are losing." A young officer asks, "What do you propose, sir?" Nagano's answer is bitter. "I propose we pray, because right now, gentlemen, we are blind in the dark." On the Wahoo, later that night. As the submarine slips silently into the abyss, the men gather in the mess room, their faces lit by dim bulbs. Steam rises from tin cups of coffee. Ortiz looks around at his crewmates, exhausted, hungry, but triumphant. "We're bleeding them, one ship at a time," he says quietly. Kennedy nods. "And soon, they'll realize it." Above them, the burned-out freighter sinks into the deep, taking Japanese hopes, fuel, and precious cargo with it. The noose tightens again, and again, and again. The silent hunters are just getting started. Section 4. The Silent Siege Beneath the Waves. June 19, 1944. Philippine Sea, 3:12 hours. Inside the steel belly of the USS Kavala, 240 feet below the surface, the air is thick with diesel fumes and human breath. Condensation drips from overhead pipes as Lieutenant Commander Herman Kosler leans over the SJ radar screen. A faint pulse flickers across the green glow. A Japanese carrier, heading straight toward them. Kosler whispers, "Battle group, approaching fast." Every man in the control room freezes. For the first time in the Pacific War, American submariners had something the Japanese never expected: eyes in the dark. The Kavala was one of dozens of American submarines hunting not by guesswork, but by mathematics. Sonar bearings, radar ranges, intercept curves. Unlike the Imperial Japanese Navy, which still relied on visual lookouts and intuition, U.S. submarines fought with a technology that turned the ocean into a map. "Bring her up to periscope depth," Kosler orders. The submarine rises slowly, silently, a steel predator lifting toward its prey. Through the periscope lens, moonlight glimmers on the waves. And then he sees her. The Shokaku, one of Japan's last great fleet carriers, survivor of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz. But tonight, she is alone. Kosler steadies his breathing. "Open outer doors. All tubes." A low metallic clank answers. Torpedo men whisper prayers into the darkness. When the USS Kavala fires her spread of 6 torpedoes, the submarine jolts as each steel cylinder launches into the deep. For a moment, there is only silence. No one exhales. Then, boom! A shockwave thunders through the hull. Another, then a third. The Shokaku, pride of the Imperial Navy, erupts into flames. As the carrier lists and burns, Japanese escorts swarm the area, dropping depth charges so heavy the Kavala bucks like a kicked animal. Light bulbs shatter. Dust falls from the pipes. Men grit their teeth to keep their courage. But the submarine slips away into the dark, unseen, untouched. One carrier sunk, one more artery severed in Japan's dying war machine. By mid-1944, Japanese sailors whispered that American submarines were everywhere, even in places no submarine could fit. Cargo captains refused to sail. Young recruits boarded transport ships knowing they had a 1 in 3 chance of making it alive. Because beneath the Pacific, the U.S. submarine fleet had become something terrifying, a machine that destroyed supply lines faster than Japan could repair them. Every torpedo that struck a Japanese freighter carried more than explosives. It carried starvation, fuel shortages, collapsing industry, and the slow strangulation of an empire built on imports. At Pearl Harbor, Japanese commanders had mocked the tiny American pig boats, insisting submarines could never decide a war. But now, 2 years later, the truth was undeniable. Battleships threatened Japan's pride. Submarines threatened Japan's existence. As Japanese aircraft factories shut down for lack of aluminum, as the Imperial Army rationed bullets to 5 per soldier, as civilians boiled grass for soup, every officer in Tokyo understood. Victory was no longer about daring pilots or mighty ships. It was about oil, steel, food, and the submarines that erased them from the Pacific. And deep beneath the waves, American crews continued their silent siege. 1 torpedo, 1 freighter, 1 nightmarish shockwave at a time. Section 5. The collapse of an empire built on imports. October 17, 1944. South China Sea. Dawn. A thin orange line cuts across the horizon as the merchant tanker Akatsuki Maru pushes through choppy waves. Her boilers wheeze, her hull groans. And on her deck, sailors scan the empty sea with haunted eyes. They know something terrifying. American submarines don't need daylight. They don't need calm seas. They don't even need luck. They only need time. Below them, lurking at 180 feet, the USS Darter glides silently like a steel spearhead. Inside the narrow control room, red emergency lights glow across soaked faces. Men strain to hear the faint hum of the tanker's engines through the hull. Lieutenant Commander David McClintock listens through his headset, eyebrows tightening. Range is closing. She's fat with fuel. The words ignite a quiet tension. Because by late 1944, a tanker wasn't just a target. It was Japan's lifeline. Every drop of oil burned in the Pacific had to travel thousands of miles from the Dutch East Indies. And now, the Darter is about to sever another artery. Come right to 085, McClintock orders. The submarine shifts course with a slow, predatory turn. Grease drips from overhead pipes. The boat hums with energy. Outside, in the cold, black water, the Darter moves into position. Fire 1. Fire 2. Fire 3. The torpedoes roar through the tubes. Seconds stretch into eternity. Men hold their breath. Then, krakoom! A plume of water erupts skyward. Flames burst from the tanker's midsection, turning dawn into a hellish orange. The Akatsuki Maru, carrying enough fuel to power a Japanese carrier group for weeks, begins to die. Her crew scrambles, yelling prayers, lowering lifeboats that will not save them. As the tanker sinks, another unspoken truth surfaces in Tokyo. Japan isn't losing ships. Japan is losing the ability to fight at all. By winter of 1944, American submarines had reduced Japan's merchant fleet by half. By early 1945, by nearly 90%. Factories shut down. Steel production collapsed. Trains sat idle. Fighters rolled out of assembly lines with no engines to install. Japan's war machine didn't just slow. It suffocated. Even the mighty battleship Yamato, symbol of Japanese naval pride, was forced to sit in harbor for months because there simply wasn't enough fuel to sail her. Meanwhile, American submarines patrolled shipping lanes like wolves circling a wounded deer. No cargo was too small. No convoy was safe. By striking freighters instead of warships, U.S. submarines had found Japan's true weakness. An empire completely dependent on the sea. February 3, 1945. Tokyo, Imperial Navy General Staff Headquarters. In a smoke-filled room, senior admirals pore over charts showing vanished convoys, missing fuel shipments, and factories reporting production losses of 80 to 98%. An intelligence officer clears his throat. "Gentlemen, if this continues, military operations will halt within weeks." A silence hangs heavy across the table. No one speaks. They don't need to. Everyone knows what no one dares admit aloud. Japan has already lost the war. And it wasn't lost in the skies or on the beaches, but in the deep, silent trenches of the Pacific. For every battleship sunk at Midway, for every airfield seized on Saipan, for every bomber that struck Tokyo, it was American submarines, invisible and relentless, that quietly destroyed Japan's ability to resist. Not with grand battles, not with heroic charges, but with mathematics, engineering, radar, torpedo mechanics, and sailors who fought in darkness so complete you could hear your own heartbeat echo through the hull. A submarine didn't just sink ships. It sank futures, plans, and hope. And as Japan's supply lines dissolved into the sea, one truth became clear to the entire world. A navy can survive losing ships. No nation can survive losing fuel. Section 6. The Hunters Become the Hunted. March 19, 1945. East China Sea, 22:14 hours. Moonlight shimmers across the black water like shards of silver. Far beneath the gentle waves, the USS Sea Lion II prowls forward, engines humming at silent running speed. The air is thick with sweat, oil, and tension. In the control room, red lights flicker across determined faces. Sonarman Robert Dixie Howell sits hunched over his hydrophone set, eyes closed, listening. A faint whoomp, whoomp, whoomp vibrates through the hull. He snaps his head up. "Contact bearing 180, fast screws, destroyer class." The words chill the room. Because by early 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy, desperate, cornered, and enraged, had thrown everything into anti-submarine warfare. Depth charges, new sonar teams, escort destroyers armed to the teeth. The submarine hunters of 1942 had become the hunted. Commander Eli Reich, steady as stone, steps forward. "Keep her quiet. All ahead 1/3. Take her deeper." The Sea Lion sinks into the darkness, hull creaking like old bones under the crushing pressure. Every man on board holds his breath, silently praying the ocean hides them. Above, the Japanese destroyer Hasu cuts across the surface at full speed, searchlights sweeping the waves. Her crew is wired with fear and revenge. They've lost brothers, uncles, entire convoys. They want blood. 22:21 hours. A booming sound shatters the deep. Humph! The first depth charge. Then another, and another. The Sea Lion is thrown sideways, glass shattering, gauges popping. Men slam against steel walls, lights flicker, pipes scream under pressure. A mechanic yells, "We're taking on seepage in the forward compartment!" Reich grips the periscope stand, knuckles white. "Hold her steady!" Metal moans, bolts shear, the sub groans like a wounded animal. A depth charge detonates so close that the entire hull flexes inward, plates bending like soft tin. For a moment, just a moment, the crew believes the ocean will crush them. But Reich knows the destroyer's weakness. Japanese sonar is primitive. Their depth charge patterns are predictable, and they dare not expend charges endlessly. Fuel and munitions are scarce. He waits, until the destroyer passes overhead in a tight turning radius. "Level the boat. All ahead full.
New course 020. The Sea Lion lunges forward in a daring sprint directly beneath the destroyer's blind spot. Minutes pass like hours. Then silence. The Hasu, unsure whether their kill was real, drifts away like a ghost. Inside the Sea Lion, men collapse onto their bunks, trembling, drenched in sweat and fear. One of them whispers, "Reich, he brought us back from the dead." But the commander only nods once and says, "Plot a course. We still have work to do." And that work would change history. Because even hunted, even outnumbered, even fighting a navy clawing at them with its dying strength, American submarines continued their campaign with brutal efficiency. They didn't just strike tankers now. They hunted warships. The Sea Lion herself would go on to sink the battleship Congo, the only battleship killed in the entire war by a submarine. Other submarines crippled destroyers, troop transports, even aircraft carriers. But most importantly, every torpedo fired in 1945 was the final nail in Japan's industrial coffin. Tokyo's factories had no steel. Kyushu's power plants had no coal. Osaka's trains ran on fumes. The Imperial Navy rationed fuel by the barrel. Japan wasn't just isolated. It was suffocating. The silent war beneath the waves, waged by a force that was barely 2% of the U.S. Navy, had broken an empire built on maritime arteries. Not with fleets, not with invasions, not with overwhelming numbers, but with precision, patience, and the crushing inevitability of arithmetic. Because by spring of 1945, every Japanese admiral knew the truth. A navy without fuel is not a navy. It is an idea waiting to die. And thanks to American submarines, Japan would never again have enough fuel to fight. Section 7. The Collapse of an Empire Beneath the Waves. April 3, 1945. Tokyo Bay, 0450 hours. A gray dawn struggles to break through thick clouds of industrial smoke. The Imperial General Staff Building, once a symbol of ambition and naval pride, now lies in a silence more terrifying than any bomb blast. Inside a dimly lit map room, Admiral Soemu Toyoda studies a wall-sized chart of Japan's sea lanes. There are red pins where convoys should be, but the ocean is empty. The few ships still assigned to supply routes are weeks overdue. Some never even made it out of port, trapped by fuel shortages, harassed by submarines lurking in the shadows of every strait. A young officer rushes in, breathless. "Admiral, reports from Sasebo. 2 more colliers sunk. No survivors." Toyota doesn't react. His eyes remain on the map. He speaks in a low, exhausted voice. "How many submarines did it take?" "Just one, sir. USS Threadfin." Toyota's jaw tightens. One submarine, barely a few dozen men, had choked off the last coal shipments to Kyushu's power grid. Without that coal, steel production would halt. Without steel, ships could not be repaired. Destroyers could not be built. Planes lacked engines. Artillery lacked barrels. Japan wasn't losing the war. Japan was being unraveled. Meanwhile, 600 miles south beneath the Philippine Sea, the USS Creval glides silently through moonlit waters. Her skipper, Commander Francis "Red" Cromwell, peers through the periscope at a dim shape on the horizon. A lone freighter, limping forward at 5 knots, unescorted. It is carrying the last of Japan's rubber supply, desperately needed by aircraft factories. Cromwell lowers the periscope and whispers, "Prepare tubes 1 and 2. The torpedoes fire with a muted thud, followed by a long, tense silence. Then, a white flash explodes across the Black Sea,
A column of flame pierces the sky as the freighter splits open, cargo spilling into the ocean like the guts of a dying beast. Japan's aircraft industry has just been dealt another fatal blow, delivered by a submarine crew whose families are thousands of miles away, waiting in quiet American towns that still glow with electricity, gasoline, and abundance. May 1945, Osaka. The once crowded streets are eerily empty. Streetcars have stopped. Factories sit dark and cold. Hospitals ration electricity by the hour. A housewife stands in line for hours only to receive a handful of barley. All the rice trains have ceased. A shopkeeper lights a lantern but snuffs it out quickly. Fuel is too precious to waste. On the city's edge, the massive Osaka steelworks, which had once poured molten fire night and day, stands frozen like a tomb. Not because it was bombed, but because there is no coal to burn, no ore to smelt, no ships to bring raw materials. Japan's economy hasn't slowed. It has stopped. Not from invasion, not from blockades, but from the invisible noose pulled tight by American submarines. June 1945, Imperial Navy Underground Headquarters. Admiral Takejiro Onishi listens as officers read casualty reports of the merchant fleet. 3,000 vessels sunk. Over 80% loss of shipping capacity. Fuel reserves below 30 days. Onishi removes his glasses and rubs his eyes. "Tell me," he asks quietly, "how many submarines do the Americans use for this devastation?" A young lieutenant swallows hard. "Sir, fewer than 50 at any given time." The room falls into stunned silence. Japan had invested its hopes in battleships, carriers, and squadrons of elite pilots, but the United States had deployed something far deadlier: efficiency, organization, relentless pressure. And Onishi knows with hollow certainty that the war is already lost. Not in the skies above Iwo Jima, not on the beaches of Okinawa, but in the cold, silent corridors beneath the Pacific. For by mid-1945, the mightiest empire in Asia was starving to death, dragged into the abyss by torpedoes fired from men they never even saw. The submarine war was not dramatic. It did not have glorious battles. There were no cheering crowds, but it was the quiet executioner of Japan's war machine. The U.S. Navy had built only a few hundred submarines. They destroyed a nation. Section 8. The Silent Hand That Ended the War. August 12, 1945. The Sea of Japan, 2:14 hours. Moonlight glimmers across a glass-still ocean as the USS Bullhead slips through the waves on what will unknowingly be one of the last American submarine patrols of the war. Inside the conning tower, a young sonar operator listens, headphones pressed tight. The deep hum of the sea surrounds him. Then, "Skipper, nothing. Absolutely nothing out there. No freighters, no tankers, no convoys. No engine signatures of any kind. The Pacific, once packed with Japanese merchant traffic, has turned into a graveyard of empty oceans. The supply lines that once fed an empire have disappeared entirely." Commander Marvin Kennedy lowers his binoculars and exhales. "Hell," he mutters, "we've run out of targets." In a war defined by massive battleships, roaring carrier decks, and endless aerial duels, it is this moment, the total absence of enemies, that signals the true destruction of Japanese power. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, 3 days after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, the Imperial Cabinet meets in a bunker beneath the shattered Defense Ministry. Air is stale. Tempers are raw. Every man present knows the truth, but none wish to speak it. Prime Minister Suzuki breaks the silence. "Even if we had 10,000 more planes," he whispers, "what fuel would they burn?" Another minister adds, trembling, "Our factories produce at 10% capacity. Coal is gone. Steel is gone. The trains have stopped." General Anami clenches his fists, veins visible on his temple. "It was not the Americans' bombs that strangled us first," he says. "It was their submarines." Every man in the room understands. Japan's defeat is not merely military. It is mathematical. The nation's lifeblood has been drained by an unseen foe beneath the waves. The submarine campaign has done something no army invasion could achieve. It shut down the empire. It turned cities dark. It emptied ports. It collapsed an entire economy. August 14, 1945, Pearl Harbor submarine base. The war is one day from ending. A group of submariners sits atop the deck of the USS Barb, shirts off, laughing over mugs of coffee. Commander Eugene Fluckey, one of the most decorated heroes of the silent service, looks across the harbor at rows upon rows of submarines returning home from their final patrols. Beside him, a young ensign asks, "Skipper, did we really make that much of a difference?" Fluckey smiles, but it's a tired smile, softened by memories of night hunts, depth-charge barrages, and friends who never returned. He places a hand on the ensign's shoulder. "Son, look around you." He points at ships returning from missions across the Pacific. "There were fewer than 300 of us, and we cut the Empire's throat." The ensign nods slowly, finally understanding the enormity of what they accomplished. Not with glory, not with headlines, but with patience, precision, and relentless pressure. Across the ocean, on a battered street in Osaka, a widow kneels beside her empty food bucket when a boy runs up the hill shouting, voice cracking with disbelief, "The war is over! Japan has surrendered!" Like a distant echo, the news rolls through alleyways and burned-out buildings. Some weep, some kneel, some simply stare at the sky in exhausted silence. But something else happens that few historians mention. A handful of Japanese officers, the ones who still study the war long after it ends, quietly admit, "We feared the American submarines more than their battleships, more than their carriers, more than their Marines." Because long before Hiroshima, long before Okinawa, long before Iwo Jima, Japan was defeated below the surface. In deep waters where no flag flies and no battlefield markers stand. The silent service, small, unseen, and often uncredited, shattered an empire more completely than any other branch of the U.S. military. August 15th, 1945, Washington, D.C. President Truman addresses the nation. Crowds erupt in celebration. But in a small office inside the Navy Department, two officers quietly update a final wartime statistic. 55% of Japan's merchant fleet destroyed. 8 million tons sunk, most by submarines. No parade will honor the men who achieved it. No grand monument will bear their names. Their victory is not remembered with fireworks, but with silence. The same silence in which they fought.